So I was already skeptical that Andy Muschietti was the right person to direct a Batman movie in the new DCU. But now, after hearing his explanation as to why he believes that his previous movie, The Flash, flopped, if he does in fact end up making The Brave and the Bold, all signs point to yet another disaster on the horizon, especially when you appear to be incapable of accepting any responsibility for your poor work and hopefully learning from it as you should. Let's discuss.
I watch so you don't have to.
All I'm offering is the truth, nothing more.
Now, before I get into one of the dumbest explanations I've ever heard for why a movie flopped, I'm going to say this. Yes, The Flash was an awful movie. It was easily one of the most miserable theater experiences that I've had in recent memory. In fact, I would say that it's borderline unwatchable from a pure filmmaking perspective, unless what you crave as an audience member is cheap nostalgia bait and god-awful CGI.
You're really talking about just raising your standards.
That being said, I do not believe that The Flash, being as terrible as it was, is all Andy Muschietti's fault. There was very clearly other factors at play here. Most notably, studio meddling. Ill-advised notes were given, changes were made on the fly, in a filmmaking by committee way that you would expect from a studio like Warner Brothers. And let's face it, Andy Muschietti does not have the pull to overcome that level of nonsense. In fact, most directors do not, which is why a company like Warner Brothers has become less and less desirable of a place to work if in fact you value creative freedom.
That makes sense.
To me, this movie was the very definition of throwing shit at the wall and seeing what sticks. And it just so happens that absolutely nothing stuck. The movie was a failure at every level, starting with the general concept. The moment that they decided to greenlight this piece of shit, it was destined to fail because of WB's creative incompetence. So fast forward to present day, and we have the Flash director and future Batman Brave and the Bold director, Andy Muschietti, explaining why he thinks The Flash ultimately ended up failing. He said, quote, "Apart from all the other reasons, it wasn't a movie that appealed to the four quadrants. It failed at that." He continued, "When you spend $200 million making a movie, Warner wants you to bring even your grandmother to the theaters. And I found out in private conversations that a lot of people just do not care about the Flash as a character, particularly the two female quadrants. All that is wind going against the movie that I learned about."
You serious?
I think I'm going to start this off by saying your first issue was thinking you needed to spend $200 million on a movie like this in the first place. But in order for the studio or Andy to recognize that, they would have to hold themselves accountable. And we know that's never going to happen. There's always going to be deflection. There's always going to be someone who is trying to blame outside forces going against the film. I'll put it this way, Godzilla Minus One cost a fraction of this film's budget, and it looks infinitely better. It's not about the money, it's about the creative behind it. That being said, based on the logic Andy is trying to present to us, I have to ask this question. If the studio or whoever told him truly believes that nobody cares about The Flash, then why was this movie made in the first place?
I don't get it.
If you truly believed that this character does not appeal to the four quadrants, which is bullshit, by the way, then why did they bother to make the movie in the first place? Apparently someone has a lot of intel on the subject. Intel that didn't take into account that somehow a Flash TV show ran for 10 seasons despite the fact that no one cares about him. Now granted, that show went on for far longer than it should have, but the point remains. I'll tell you this, I can't speak for everyone, obviously, but as a longtime DC fan, The Flash, as a character, is probably my third or fourth favorite DC character behind only Batman, Superman, and the Joker. As a fan of The Flash, him making that jump to the big screen was a no-brainer, both because of the story potential with the character as well as the spectacle potential. The Flash would be perfect for a memorable cinematic experience, and that is exactly why I wanted a solo film for him for so long. That is also simultaneously the reason why the piece of shit that they gave us was so disappointing. Because I know, and a lot of other people know, that the character deserved much better.
It's true.
Them saying that no one cares about the Flash only confirms what I already knew. And that's that unless they have a brilliant mind at the helm of one of their projects, Warner Brothers as a studio clearly does not understand the characters that they owned or the DC brand in general. Have you ever heard a more obvious example that clearly and painfully reinforces my theory? The biggest head scratcher of this whole explanation was the part where he talks about how this character doesn't appeal to the female audience. Now, I understand that housewives showing up to the theater to gawk at Jason Momoa and pushing the Aquaman film to over $1 billion might have sent the wrong message to WB. But are we really going to sit here and suggest that every single successful comic book movie that's come out over the past 2 decades didn't have women in the theater supporting it? And a lot of those characters who had successful movies are considerably less popular and less interesting than the Flash is.
Why the hierarchy of power in the DC universe is about to change.
The truth is, women or men, I don't really give a shit. If you actually make a good movie, most likely people are going to show up. Now, the MCU is probably a bad example for this because it did get to a point where people were showing up to see those movies out of pure obligation. But it also is the perfect example because it says something about how Disney and Marvel once had the MCU brand in a place where demand for new projects was high regardless of the quality of those projects. Warner Brothers never presented DC or allowed DC to blossom into something that would create that kind of demand. And it was all because they couldn't get out of their own way. If audiences look at certain characters and the DC brand overall in a negative light, it's because of the way that WB has treated those properties. They have no one to blame but themselves, yet here we have one of their employees saying, well, sometimes the audience just isn't interested.
I have no idea what I'm doing, but I know I'm doing it really, really well.
The audience isn't interested because you or whoever is above you isn't putting in the work to make them interested. Believe it or not, people are no longer obligated to blindly support every piece of garbage that comes out in the comic book movie genre. Now more than ever, you have to do something to make your movie stand out. You have to make people want to go see it. And nobody was able to do that with The Flash. From the moment the first trailer premiered, and maybe even before that, people could see right through this movie. It's bad enough that you had Ezra Miller, the star of this movie, out there doing whatever he was doing in his spare time. But you also lazily paraded Michael Keaton's Batman out there in hopes that that would entice people to want to watch this movie. And it didn't work. You put countless CGI cameos and Easter eggs in this film in hopes of enticing people to want to watch this movie, and it didn't work. You actually showcased the piss-poor CGI in this movie in hopes of enticing people into thinking they were going to see something that resembled a genuine spectacle, and it didn't work. Andy Muschietti and WB did everything possible to try to make people care about this movie, except the one thing they should have done, and that's make a good movie.
That is why you fail.
But I guess it's much easier to run Flash's name through the mud and blame the female audience for not being interested. When the real problem is a multi-billion-dollar company couldn't simply do their job and tell a coherent story, or even a mediocre story. Everyone involved, from WB to DC Studios to Andy Muschietti himself, are completely clueless if they think this is a viable explanation. This is exactly why DC is in the position it's in now. Your lack of willingness to read the room and learn from your past mistakes. And it's clear to me now more than ever that WB learned absolutely nothing from this debacle. It's an absolute disgrace. It's actually embarrassing that they have creative control over such iconic characters, and yes, The Flash is included in that, and yet they still have no idea what to actually do with them or how to portray them in a cinematic way. When I say that this is a fundamental problem starting at the studio level, this is exactly the type of shit that I'm talking about.
Y'all be cool. Right on.